What is up, you guys, and welcome back to my channel. So I am doing an entire video on the update I have for Michaela Garecht, which I kind of told you guys I figured was going to happen. This is a 32-year-old case, and you don't typically see these sort of arrests and charges being made in a case this old. It's just not very common. But this one is one that spirals it even deeper because now we have a serial killer, or at least a potential serial killer, on our hands. So I wanted to make sure I really went in depth here. The man that has been charged with Michaela Garecht's murder and abduction was already in jail for the murder of another woman in Hayward, California. And he's also, apart from the charges in Michaela's murder, awaiting trial for charges in a double homicide. There's absolutely no telling how many other unnamed victims there are out there. Please make sure to share this video. What is the start of closure for Michaela's family and getting justice for Michaela is now turning into there are other potential families out there that might need this closure as well, and this man might have answers. Before I get into a recap of Michaela's story, I need to say a huge thank you to Morning Brew for sponsoring today's video. As I'm sure you can all imagine, I am incredibly picky when it comes to the type of daily news that I consume. I am a busy mom, I'm a full-time worker, and I like to be able to consume essential information and relevant topics in a very short period of time. Now, this is where Morning Brew has come in really handy for me. Morning Brew is a free daily newsletter that is delivered straight to your inbox Monday through Saturday. It gets you up to speed on current events and business news in only 5 minutes. So instead of scrolling endlessly through traditional news sources and information that's not always beneficial to you, Morning Brew is able to deliver witty and relevant information in an easy to understand format that I can quickly read through while I'm getting in my morning coffee. I find personally that I leave Morning Brew feeling educated and kind of like informed and relaxed instead of overwhelmed and confused, which I typically left feeling with traditional news. This year, I'm trying to be a lot more intentional with my time and how I use media, so I'm replacing my excessive Instagram scrolling in the morning when I browse Morning Brew instead. Just this week, Morning Brew helped remind me that it's tax season. And unfortunately, taxes are probably going to look a little bit different this year, so it led me to a really awesome article to kind of guide me through this process during challenging times. But what's awesome about it is in that same breath, I was also given a list of weekend conversation starters and a pretty awesome crossword puzzle to help ground me a little bit after said tax information. For those of you that want to stay informed in a very effective and also enjoyable way, there's absolutely no reason not to subscribe to Morning Brew. It's free, first of all, and it also takes less than 15 seconds to subscribe. All you have to do is go and click the link in my description box down below to subscribe to Morning Brew today, and we can enjoy it together. Thank you again to Morning Brew for sponsoring today's video, and now we can get into the Michaela Garecht recap. So again, I covered this video years ago, and while there were a bunch of different theories, some of which being potential serial killers, I don't think anyone really expected it to go the way that it's going. At 10:15 a.m. on Saturday, November 19th, 1988, Michaela headed out of her home in Hayward, California with her best friend, Katrina Rodriguez, on scooters. Their plan was to go 2 blocks away to the Rainbow Market for some candy and soda. Now, upon leaving this convenience store, Michaela noticed that one of their scooters had been moved further away in the parking lot, a little bit isolated. So she went to go and grab it, not thinking anything of it. But when she went to retrieve the scooter, there was a car parked directly beside it, and a man inside of the car grabbed her around her waist, pulled her in, and sped off. And Michaela was never seen again. She was only 9 years old. And I cannot imagine the level of fear Michaela and Katrina both had during the situation. Immediately, Michaela's friend Katrina Rodriguez ran inside of the Rainbow Market and informed the clerk of what had just happened, so authorities were called. The clerk who called 911 ended up giving the dispatcher a description of the abductor and apparently ended up giving the wrong one. A few other witnesses had come forward from the parking lot, and some of them had kind of one description, but I think there was one person in particular the clerk was listening to, and they said that the abductor was a hippie-like man in his 30s, and he had a mustache and was driving a burgundy vehicle. So for 2 days after Michaela was abducted, a man and a car of this description were being searched for, until they figured out that this information was entirely incorrect and Katrina and other witnesses had seen something different. So Katrina reported that the suspect was actually more likely 18 to 24 years old, and he was around 6 feet tall with a really slender build. He had about shoulder length, dirty blonde hair, and the most recognizable thing about him was that he had a lot of acne and severe pox scarring. The car also was definitely not burgundy. Katrina said that the car Michaela was pulled into was actually just a 4-door sedan that was either gold or tan, and she specifically remembered that the front bumper had damage on it, and I believe there was like splatters of cement on the rest of the car. There was a pretty serious investigation done. So this was not a case that was just kind of, oh, this is weird, we don't have much information, but we'll do what we can, and then they dropped it. Investigators quite literally did not stop working on the case until they solved it a month ago. Hayward Police Department brought in the FBI. Searches were done on foot as well as by helicopter and airplane. Other different surrounding law enforcement was able to come in and help. They searched everywhere. They also were able to take the scooter that Michaela was trying to retrieve, and they were able to pull palm prints and fingerprints off of the handles. But unfortunately, fingerprints don't really do any good unless there's someone to match them to. And, DNA also at this point was just in its beginning stages. I don't even really think it was quite there yet. So they were pretty much relying on the composite sketch that they created off of Katrina and a few other witnesses' description of this abductor. There were dozens and dozens and dozens of leads and potential suspects over the years, and authorities made sure to take their time kind of one by one, ruling people out as much as they possibly could because they just didn't have much to go on. And if someone came forward about someone that matched the sketch, they had to make sure they were, crossing all their T's and dotting all their I's. One of the huge theories that I mentioned in my case, which was kind of the first idea that possibly serial killers were involved, it was the speed freak killers. And I told you guys I would create a video about it, and I just now am realizing that I definitely didn't. So I'll have to add that to my list because they also have so many potential victims. So raising exposure means everything. But the speed freak killers are Lauren Herzog and Wesley Shermantine. Now, it seemed like such a huge possibility that they were involved because they were only convicted of 4 murders, but it's thought that they actually had about 72 different victims in San Joaquin County, California alone. Letters that Shermantine would send his sister while he was sitting on death row gave kind of like a detailed list of where they had disposed of a lot of their victims. And I know that some of it, I believe, was like falsified. It was just creating something. But there was one particular location, and it was a well. And in this well, there were some little Mary Jane shoes that were found, and the Mary Jane shoes were very similar to the ones that Michaela had been wearing when she disappeared. But unfortunately, I feel like that led absolutely nowhere. There also were bone shards that they found, and because they couldn't really figure out much from the bone shards other than collecting DNA, eventually they were DNA tested, and it was found that they were not Michaela's. But the involvement of the speed freak killers was something that was questioned up until as recently as 2015. Another huge possible suspect, and one that I believe most of us in the comments kind of agreed that we thought was the most likely, was Tim Bendner. Tim is someone that people have questioned all across California for a very long time because he puts himself in the middle of investigations. Now, there's kind of a fine line between wanting to help in searches when people go missing. But when you are a grown man that is consistently only showing up to missing young girls' searches or, trying to call and ask in about these particular missing persons cases, it can be a little suspicious because that is something that a lot of different serial killers or just killers will sometimes do. They want to put themselves into the investigation. They want to help with searches because it's almost like they're basking in their own glory. It's this idea of all these people are looking for me and they have no idea that here I am helping them. I'm literally with them speaking to them. They weren't ever able to find any evidence whatsoever to connect him to any of these disappearances, including Michaela's, and he continuously denied involvement, so that theory pretty much went nowhere. Phil Garrido was also another huge potential person of interest or suspect in the case because, if you're not familiar with that name, he was who abducted and held captive J.C. Lee Dugard. The reason it was believed that he could have possibly had something to do with Michaela Garecht's abduction is because of the method in which the abduction occurred. I think that was kind of the only thing that really led people to believe this. Authorities thought it was such a huge possibility that they searched his entire home, they searched the car, they questioned him about it, but ultimately they were never able to find anything at all to suggest that he was involved in her abduction. So again, they had to kind of put him to the side. So all these different theories were really looked into, but the thing that's so frustrating about this case is that just 2 years after Michaela was abducted, the man that is charged today with her murder ended up being arrested in connection to another murder, also in Hayward, California. But he sat in prison for that murder up until 2017, 2018, and now for Michaela, 2020, until other victims were connected to him. So just kind of knowing that this man has been at authorities' fingertips for so long and managed to somehow so flawlessly pull off this abduction without it being traced back to him is infuriating. It's almost this feeling where you're happy that he wasn't able to be out and hurt anyone. He quite literally has been in prison since 1990. He hasn't been able to hurt anybody else, but also he was that close. So in 1990, David Emery Mish pled guilty to the murder of 36-year-old Margaret N. Ball. Now, I have not been able to find many details when it comes to her murder online. The only thing that I managed to find on her was that she was found in her home in December of 1989, and she had been stabbed to death in her home in Hayward, California. I have no clue how they managed to link this murder to Mish. I do know that he did not know her at all prior to this murder, but ultimately he did plead guilty and he was sentenced to 18 years to life in prison for it. But it took until 2017 for kind of things to start moving again when it comes to Mish, and his victims that they ended up finding were also linked to him. But in that entire time that he was incarcerated, he not once to anyone mentioned anything about other victims until police started putting things together in 2017. And it wasn't even because they believed he had other victims. They had no idea who this man was. It just happened to pop up in like the most coincidental way. On February 2nd, 1986, just 2 years prior to Michaela's abduction, two best friends were found murdered and thrown on the side of the road, and I think it was Mill Creek Road in Fremont, California, by a motorcyclist that just happened to be passing by. 18-year-old Michelle Xavier and 20-year-old Jennifer Dewey were longtime best friends, and they had spent the previous night having a birthday dinner with family. They were having a great time. They both left together, and the last time they were seen was at around 8:30 p.m. that night at a 7-Eleven on Farwell Drive and Maury Avenue. But neither Michelle nor Jennifer returned home that night. At around 12:30 a.m., this motorcyclist that I spoke of before just happened to be driving by when he noticed two women on the side of the road, and he immediately called authorities. When authorities arrived, they found two young women completely naked and stabbed to death with clear signs of sexual assault. They were pretty quickly able to identify both of them as Michelle and Jennifer. They did eventually find Michelle's car that they had been using at a parking lot at a mall, I believe about 6 miles away, but to this day, I don't believe they've ever found the girl's identification, their clothing from that night, pretty much any of their personal belongings that they had on them. Now, despite a $35,000 reward, which was a pretty large reward at that time, and many leads and persons of interest, over the years, the case did what most cases do, and it just fizzled out. There just wasn't anything else for authorities to look into, so the case ultimately went cold. In 2017, like I stated, detectives started to poke around and try to figure things out. Specifically, Detective Jacob Blass. He had just been in his position, I believe, for about 4 years as a detective, and he noticed that he was getting about 3 to 4 calls a week asking about the status of Michelle and Jennifer's case. And so he decided they were going to make it a priority and they were going to look into it every second they had free time. Upon re-examining the case files, he noticed that there were several pieces of evidence that were taken from the crime scene. So they were able to gather a lot. But like I stated earlier, there wasn't really DNA testing being done frequently at this time. So they had all of this stuff for potential DNA testing and decided to run all of it. There was one piece of evidence in particular that was very important. One of the girls had skin that was found underneath of her nails. So that was obviously scraped out and saved as evidence. And we all know, typically, that ends up leading to the attacker. When they tested the DNA and put it through a database, it ended up connecting them back to David Emery Mish. So this man that had been sitting in prison for the murder of a woman in Hayward now was being connected to a double homicide only 11 miles away, and somehow it took this long to figure it out, which I'm not speaking negatively about the police department. It just kind of makes you think about how flawlessly he seemed to execute a lot of this. Like nothing otherwise had been found. And this really had authorities worried that there were other possible victims, because this is the typical trademark of a serial killer. In 2018, totally separate, Hayward authorities started to re-examine Michaela's case. They frequently would look into it around the time of her disappearance at the anniversary, but this year they really wanted to sit down and re-examine everything to see if they could maybe use new technology to push the case forward. Little did they know, Fremont Police Department was also on the search for other potential victims of Mish. Their main hope was to relook at the palm prints and fingerprints that were found on the scooter, because that was kind of the main piece of evidence that they had. And authorities were given a list of potential abductors in the area, and Mish was on this list thanks to a red flag by Fremont authorities. And lo and behold, it came back as a match. When they ran the prints, Mish was the one that popped up. So authorities decided to look through booking photos at the time of Michaela's disappearance, see what exactly he was being put in jail for, what any of his booking photos looked like, and sure enough, Mish was described as a 6-foot, slim-build man of about 27 years old with shoulder-length, dirty blonde hair. So they decided to bring in 2 of the eyewitnesses from that day who also, thank goodness these people were able to come in 32 years later, and they both were able to successfully identify Mish out of a photo lineup. Not to sound absolutely insane, but I actually am receiving a phone call right now, not from Fremont, California, but from Fremont, it's not going to pick it up, Fremont, North Carolina, that just gave me goosebumps, and now my stomach is hurting. In response to finding out this information, that this case that they have been trying to solve for 32 years now is successfully solved because Fremont successfully solved a double homicide, which was only solved because one detective wanted to look into it, which was also only solved because he somehow managed to get caught from a totally separate murder. It's absolutely insane. And they decided on December 2nd of this past year, so quite literally like a little over a month ago, that they were going to go to the California healthcare facility in Stockton where Mish was being held at the time. He was, when they went to visit him, already sitting there awaiting trial for the double homicide that they ended up charging him with of Michelle and Jennifer. And I'm sure he was quite shocked when they told him, hey, we're here to investigate Michaela Garecht. We have a warrant for your DNA and we have a warrant to obtain your finger and palm prints. As I'm sure you can guess, this didn't go over well. I think at this point he was realizing, crap, I've already been pinned for this double murder that I was responsible for, and I don't think he was expecting them to come with Michaela Garecht. Mish completely denied speaking to authorities. He said he wouldn't talk to anyone without an attorney, and even though they did have a court-ordered warrant, he refused to comply with the warrant as well. I'm not exactly sure how they treated that situation. I know they tried to tell him over and over again that it was a court-ordered warrant. Like, his representation wasn't going to get him out of that or help him with that. But either way, despite being completely uncooperative with authorities, on December 21st of this last year, Alameda County was able to charge Mish with the murder and kidnapping of Michaela Garecht. Now, I know that they are alleging special circumstances, which I'm not very familiar with what that means, but they said that there are a few special circumstances that essentially mean he could be eligible for the death sentence, which is interesting to see in California, and we'll see how that goes. But the reasoning behind these special circumstances, first of all, is that Michaela was murdered in the act of an abduction, and also he had been convicted of a murder before. Mish also had a series of violent criminal charges and convictions in his past as well. He had been charged with assault with a deadly weapon in 1982, and then I think commercial burglary just months before Michaela's abduction. So they're using this to try to get the harshest punishment possible when they go to take him to trial for the murder and abduction of Michaela Garecht. There are some issues coming into play on what people believe the charges should actually be, because obviously we have the palm print and the fingerprints that have been connected to him, but that technically only proves that he abducted Michaela. I've actually had a couple of people in my DMs saying, no body has been found. I'm not sure how they're going to charge him with murder. They have no physical evidence suggesting he killed her. But from my understanding, authorities state that with his history, they're able to do so comfortably. According to authorities, he has yet to have a history, the 3 other homicides, of leaving anyone alive. He also has absolutely no history of keeping someone captive, and if he had kept her captive and then somehow or for some reason released her, then it's likely she would have turned up somewhere. But they don't believe there's any way that Mish would have kept Michaela alive for an extended period of time. She's 9 years old. She's fully capable of identifying someone that attacked her. Her friend witnessed it. Also was very familiar at this point with the criminal process and charges that would be against him for abduction of a child. Again, unfortunately, this is just speculation, obviously, but based on his other victims, sexual assault typically occurred as well. So sexually assaulting a minor. There's just a whole slew of different charges that they believe would have pushed him to not keep her alive. He wanted to make sure that she disappeared. Everyone thought she was just abducted and taken off somewhere, and nothing could ever be proven. So because of all of this, they genuinely believe he more than likely did murder Michaela. The one thing that really gets to me, though, is that her family's been waiting for justice and closure and some questions answered for 32 years. And this is a big pill to swallow. They're hearing what this man has done to other individuals and also being told that their daughter ended up being one of those victims. I can't imagine hearing the stories of these other women being taken and stabbed and, sexually assaulted, and then picturing your 9-year-old daughter and having to kind of grapple with that. At the same time, I have this horrible feeling that he is not going to disclose where her remains are. I'm not sure we ever will, because if you look at this man, again, he was charged and convicted and thrown in prison for 18 to life in 1990. He literally did not even give any clue away to anyone that I know of that he had other potential victims. That's 27 years that he managed to stay entirely silent about people that he had murdered. And that sends the biggest chill down my spine, because not only does that make me think that he will have absolutely no issue never telling where he buried Michaela, but it also makes me terrified because how many other victims are there? Because clearly he's not going to give any of them over to authorities. He's acting like he's not responsible for the double homicide, for Michaela's abduction and murder. He's completely okay with just pretending like he's not involved in it. So this is why I felt it was so important to make an entire video on Michaela Garecht's update, because it's opened this can of worms. We know that at this point, at least, from 1986 till 1989, he killed 4 women and a girl, a young girl. And again, that leads us to age range. He's everywhere from 9 to 36 years old. That is not specific in the slightest, which basically, in my opinion, indicates that any woman any female was totally up for grabs regardless of age or anything. It's also worrisome because it seems Michelle and Jennifer, at least from my understanding, it seems they were taken from a parking lot because that's where their car was found. Michaela was taken from a parking lot. So you're thinking, okay, here's a pattern maybe. Where are some other victims that have been taken from parking lots? But then you think about the fact that he also murdered someone within their own home and just left her there. So I just feel like he doesn't have such a specific MO. Like there is not a very specific thing for him, and that makes it scary when it comes to narrowing down other victims in California. Now, I have absolutely no clue at this point when he will be going to trial for the murder of Michaela Garecht. We know, based on what authorities have said, that in December he still had yet to go to trial for the murders of Michelle and Jennifer. So I will make sure to keep my eye on it and keep you guys informed. That is all that I have for you guys today. I know a lot of us are probably very thankful to see that there are finally charges in Michaela's case. She was definitely one of those I felt like I was never going to get an opportunity to do an update on, but apparently that's just how 2020 and now into 2021 is going. With all these advancements in technology, the things that authorities are able to do for these older cases that could have been solved but weren't, simply because, you know, advancement-wise, we just weren't there yet. It's just really awesome to see it all happening. I'm really happy to see these different families get that closure, even though it's not the answers that they want, even though it's not their loved one coming home safely. Just knowing that the unknown has been taken from their mind does give me a little bit more peace. And hopefully, especially in this case, other families are in line after this. Hopefully other connections are made, or it's maybe ruled that this is it for him and he's put away. Families have been notified, families understand what happened, and everyone can start to heal. Now, before I fully leave today, I want to urge you guys to go and watch my last video on Melissa Platt. That was a tough one, and you guys handled it beautifully. Her sister, Michelle, is speechless from the amount of kindness and caring that you guys have shown ever since I posted that video. I did alert you guys that there was a GoFundMe for a private investigator that was going on. I made a donation, and then shortly after, you guys blew it out of the water. At this point, I believe it's over $1,500 that's been raised to help this family get a PI since my video went live. You guys quite literally never cease to amaze me in your support and care for these families, and I just wanted to thank you literally from the bottom of my heart. It makes such a big difference, and I really, really want all of you to know that even if you couldn't donate and you just watched and shared the video, you have no clue how much it means for these families. And I get to hear these families tell me how much it means. So I just wanted to make sure I'm able to relay that information to you, because these families simply would not have that level of support if it was not for you guys watching my videos. And then that makes me thankful, because all of my work that I put into these videos and helping these families, you guys give me the platform that I have to do so. And it means so freaking much to everybody involved. Michelle's at the halfway mark at this point to being able to pay the retainer for the PI, and you guys helped her do that. You guys helped her get that far, and that could mean the difference between Melissa getting justice and a man that clearly has a history of violent domestic abuse being put away. So if you are able, make sure you go check out my previous video and check the description. The GoFundMe is linked there, and you guys can donate whatever you can. I would really, really, really love to see them hit the retainer for the PI. I would love to see things start, things get in motion on Melissa's case. So again, thank you to all of you who did donate. Thank you to all of you who are going to donate. I appreciate each and every single one of you. You're changing lives so much, and I hope that you see that. Now I'm going to finally go. Thank you guys again so much. If you haven't already, hit the subscribe button to become a part of the Hallan fam so that we can hopefully bring them home together, and I will see you guys in my next video. Bye.